Welcome to Rocking with Nostalgia. We are once again traveling back to the gaming days of CRT televisions, where we're going to take a look at some underrated Super Nintendo games. So grab your rocking chair and let's get started.
Now you're playing with power, superpower.
Thank you again for joining me. If this is your first time, please subscribe, but let's get right into it. So Super Nintendo, another great system from the 16-bit era of the early to mid-90s. I still remember getting my Super Nintendo. So if you'd seen some of my other videos, I had mentioned how I grew up in a village. And I say village because I really need to set the tone at how small it actually was. 600 people. So anyways, when I would go into the big town with my parents, a city with a population of about 30,000, that is where I did my shopping for video games. So that is where I had to buy my Super Nintendo. So I still remember we went to Target to get it. Everywhere else was sold out, and I had saved up my money to buy this, and when we get there, we see that they don't have the standard system. They only have the one that had the console itself and one controller. It was not the standard bundle that had two controllers and Super Mario World packed in. So anyways, I wanted to buy it still, and I was just going to buy the extra controller and some games at the time, but my parents would not allow it. Again, it was my own money, but they said, no, you're going to regret this. So I whined, but they stuck to their guns, and Target put me on a list and said they would call once the system came in. So fast forward, it was only about a week later, but you know, at that age, elementary age, a week seems like an eternity, but it came in, I went and got it, brought it home, and just like the Genesis, it became one of my all-time favorite systems. So today we're going to be looking at 10 underrated games that, in my opinion, fly under the radar and don't get mentioned as much as some of the other games in the Super Nintendo library. Let's get the thumbnail game out of the way and talk about Rock and Roll Racing, an amazing vehicular combat game and one of my all-time favorites. In 1993, we got Rock and Roll Racing, which combines adrenaline-fueled racing action with killer rock tunes, delivering an experience that's unforgettable. The game has vibrant graphics, smooth animation, excellent controls, and it's very easy to pick up and play, and it does have a fairly lengthy single-player experience to it. It is played from an isometric perspective, and it has many standard vehicular combat tropes, such as upgradable vehicles, power-ups, missiles, landmines, and things like that. What really made this game stand out for me personally is its personality. From the many awesome and unique characters you can choose from, all with their own style and attitude, to the varied levels and worlds you travel to, the amazing commentary by Loudmouth Larry, and finally the fantastic soundtrack. All of this adds up to a package that's incredibly memorable. And let's talk about that soundtrack. It has actual songs from popular artists that you would hear on the radio. And for me, I think this was the first time I actually ever heard popular artists being on a soundtrack for a video game. So you had the likes of George Thorogood, Deep Purple, Steppenwolf, and my favorite, Black Sabbath, who performed Paranoid.
Let the carnage begin!
It was so awesome hearing 16-bit versions of some rock classics. This game is available on the Blizzard Arcade Collection, which was released in 2021 on modern consoles. They did add some new features such as widescreen support, 4-player split screen, save states, and you are able to toggle between the digitized soundtrack and the actual recordings of the song. But it seems they must have not renewed the license to Paranoid because it is missing. They also brought back Larry Loudmouth to re-record the lines from the original game and also record some brand new lines. As of May 2024, this version is currently going for $20, but I looked at my purchase history and I see I bought it on Xbox for $10 last November, so you might want to be on the lookout for a sale. So if you're craving some retro racing action with a rock and roll twist, I would fire up Rock and Roll Racing. The entire reason I wanted to do this underrated video game series is because of the next game. I saw it on a list of games you should never ever play for Super Nintendo, and that really disappointed me. Released in 1992, American Gladiators perfectly captured the feel and excitement of the amazing TV show of the same name through a collection of mini-games that replicated the challenges of the TV show. So how many of us used to watch the show and wish we could take part in the competitions we were seeing on TV? I'm definitely raising my hand because I was totally that person. And you are able to do so in this game and relive the Assault, Human Cannonball, Atmosphere, Joust, Powerball, the Wall, and the Eliminator. Now, as I mentioned, seeing the game on a list of SNES titles to never play did disappoint me, but I do understand where the player was coming from. Watching the gameplay footage, it seemed like they were getting stuck at many areas and not sure what to do. And this does make sense because the mini games are pretty ambiguous and figuring them out can be kind of tricky. The controls are also finicky, with many games requiring precise placement to make progress, especially grabbing and shooting the various weapons in Assault. So what I recommend is playing the tournament in the game, where you can use up to 16 characters, that's 8 male and 8 female characters, to learn the game. You'll need 2 controllers, but it's the best way to learn the intricacies of the 7 games and figure out how to work all the games. But once you do figure it out, and you get the controls and mechanics down, I feel like this game is a ton of fun, and you're going to have a blast reliving the glory days of the American Gladiators. In 1995, Capcom brought us the JRPG Breath of Fire 2. So for me, I didn't start playing JRPGs until a year later when Super Mario RPG was released, and then after that, I soon moved on to the PlayStation 1, which was filled with so many JRPG classics, and so I missed out on Breath of Fire 2. So I actually first played this on the Nintendo Switch Online app a few years back. And overall, I thought it was an excellent JRPG. I would say it's a very typical JRPG. The main protagonist is the Chosen One, and of course he's unaware of it. The battle system, inventory, and menus are all standard fare, and many of your party members fit the typical archetypes of other RPGs, though I do especially love any RPG that has anthropomorphic animals as allies. That always is bonus points for me. But that doesn't mean I'm belittling it. It had a very captivating story, solid graphics and music. It provided a fair challenge. There were many dungeons that I needed to repeat. The bosses were interesting. And another feature I really loved about this was it has town building mechanics where you populate your town with characters found throughout the game. This is very similar to the Suikoden series, which is one of my all-time favorite game series. Now, there is a negative about this game. It does have a lot of random generated battles, so that grinding could turn off some players. This might be another one that's not really underrated, but it seems I only hear people talk about Part 3 and 4, which were on PlayStation 1. Another thing I'd say is I would consider this a great starter RPG for those who are interested in getting a taste of the genre and seeing what it's all about. But even if you're a veteran of JRPGs, Breath of Fire 2 can still be a lot of fun. So if you want a whimsical take on the fighting genre, I would take a look at Clay Fighter, which also has a great sense of humor. Just like Rock'n'Roll Racing, this game has an awesome personality about it. I always love the ridiculous character names that are puns on literary characters and pop culture figures such as Bad Mr. Frosty, The Blob, Bonker, Blue Suede Goo, Helga, Ichabod Clay, and more. I always got a crack at the over-enthusiastic announcer in the game, which added to its surreal nature. There's something about announcers in games during the 16-bit era that made me give them bonus points, and this was another one. To me, the graphics at the time were exceptional. The claymation-style graphics, they were created by photographing and digitizing actual clay models, so they really pulled that aesthetic into the game very well. It does have your standard fighting game mechanics, so the controls such as sweeping the D-pad to do a special move, the background and levels are going to be tailored to characters in the games. You're all going to be leading up to a final battle with an end boss, and so on. The footage here that we're looking at is from the Tournament Edition, which was a Blockbuster rental exclusive, and it improved upon the original by fixing a lot of glitches, added some additional stage backgrounds, some additional difficulty settings and so on. But if the original is the only one you can get your hands on, I would go for it. Now this game, it doesn't stand up to the likes of Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter or some other classics from that time, but Clay Fighter is a goofy, totally zany take on the genre, and I'm sure if you play it, it's going to give you a chuckle or two and put a smile on your face. Survey says, yes, I am talking about a game show game. Family Feud was released in 1993. And to be honest, a lot of game show video games during the 16-bit era were a lot of fun to play. You have the Jeopardy games, Wheel of Fortune, and especially Family Feud. The game captures all aspects of the TV show, including the bullseye round, which was present on the TV show at the time. It has the questions round and the 2 fast money rounds to end the show, and it all moves fast and pretty seamless. It had Ray Combs, who was hands down my favorite host of the show, rest in peace, my friend, to oversee all the action. I'm not sure how accurate you need to be with the spelling of the answers. I had a question about a model of vehicle that is no longer around, and I answered Datsun, though I know I spelled it wrong. And then the computer answered Model T, which was also wrong. So I still don't know the answer. And again, I don't know how accurate you have to be, but I would assume that they factored in for variations on words. But the greatest thing about Family Feud is that you really need to travel back in time and place your mind into someone from the 90s and think about society's attitudes, the thoughts, and the stances on various survey topics and questions if you want to excel at this game. Some answers you'll really realize that times have changed and it wouldn't apply to today. And seeing some of these survey answers were truly like jumping in a DeLorean and traveling back to the 90s. And for me, that alone is enough to make this game worth playing. Family Feud is a ton of fun to play, and even better if you have some friends, so check it out if you get a chance. Unless you were a Detroit Pistons fan, like I am, or a teammate of this person, you probably hated this man, and you probably hated this game too. Released in 1991 by Hudson Soft, Bill Laimbeer's Combat Basketball took the action of pro basketball and added a layer of violence with the spin on traditional sports that was super popular at the time. This was a game that me and my friends would play endlessly, especially during those rainy summer days growing up in the Midwest. It does have absolutely wonky controls. You only use the D-pad and the B button. So on offense, you press a direction and B, and that would pass. And if you press only the B button alone, that would shoot. On defense, pressing B alone would jump, while pushing it with the direction would shove the opponent. And like many other combat sports titles at the time, the court was littered with power-ups and obstacles to ramp up the action. Once you got over those wonky controls, though, there's a lot of fun to be had with this game. And it's actually pretty easy to pick up and play once you figure everything out. It's funny how back in the day, so many games had major flaws with them, but players would work with them and figure it out and adjust to those major flaws. We didn't have endless games to play or the ability to quickly download something new if we weren't happy with the game we were playing. We had to physically travel somewhere to either rent or buy a new game. So with that mindset, we learned to deal with those flaws and make the best of it. And if you can do the same today with Bill Laimbeer's Combat Basketball, you're going to have a lot of fun. Released in 1992 and the fourth game in the series, Super Double Dragon once again follows the brothers Billy and Jimmy Lee as they make their way through a crime-ridden city to defeat the evil bad guys. This is another game I'm not sure how remembered or revered it is. I just never hear this being mentioned with the likes of Streets and Rage, Final Fight, and so on, especially considering how popular the NES games were. And for me, this game seemed to come out of nowhere like a lot of games did at the time. You just show up at your local video store or department store and there's a brand new game in the Double Dragon series ready for you to rent. Super Double Dragon is a standard beat 'em up, though it's not quite as speedy as Streets of Rage or Final Fight, and it's a bit slower and more methodical with unique fighting mechanics. You had the ability to be able to catch opponents' attacks, and then you could choose to pummel them with punches, kicks, or a combination of both, and the animations looked really great while doing it. Kicking your opponent from one side of the face to the other looked absolutely fantastic. It also added the dragon power gauge by holding the L or R buttons to do special attacks, and depending on how long you filled this gauge would determine how long this special attack would last, so that was new for the Double Dragon series. I also really like the look of this game, lots of neon. It seemed like neon was everywhere during this time in video games. And finally, there's something about this game that gave me a sense of adventure, unlike many others at the time. I remember many nights, especially the cold ones in the winter months, where the sun started setting at 4:30, and I'd be playing Super Double Dragon, and I'd physically pump myself up and tell myself, we have to beat the bad guys, we have to save the day. It was very similar to Neverending Story, where Bastion huddles under his blanket, he grabs his candle, and he starts the adventure to save Fantasia. And I know I wasn't the only kid who did this. So while it might not excite me quite to those levels anymore, Super Double Dragon is still a good time for fans of 16-bit beat-em-ups. Brought to us by Acclaim in 1994, True Lies lets us play through the movie the same name as Harry Tasker, who was portrayed by Arnold Schwarzenegger in the movie. We know many licensed games are crap, but this one is actually a pretty great time to play through. Using pistols, Uzis, shotguns, flamethrowers, and other weapons, you make your way through 9 different stages, and I really love the action of it. It feels great to unload a few shotgun shells on enemies and seeing their blood spill everywhere. Some games just feel better and more tactile than others when using weapons, or there's more weight to it, and that's the case with True Lies. Besides shooting, players can also dive and strafe to help take out enemies. I also had a blast killing civilians, though you can't kill too many or it's game over. Tom Arnold's character is also in the game, and he pops up on screen giving you directions and objectives to complete just like he does in the movie. Stills from the movie are placed throughout the game, moving the story along and immersing the player in the True Lives universe. As mentioned, this game does have 9 stages, though many of the stages have multiple parts to them, which gives True Lies a pretty substantial single-player campaign. The game is pretty difficult, but there are cheat codes if you need them, and I certainly did. When I was a little kid, I had to use the unlimited weapon cheat to be able to beat the game. Luckily for me, someone wrote down the codes in the instruction booklet from the store that I rented the game. It's funny how a lot of games back in the day were super difficult, and I know that developers did that to extend the length of the game, but a lot of times they were just frankly unplayable, and it would frustrate players until they found out about special codes, and then that could put a whole new spin and direction on the game. But anyways, True Lies is something you might have skipped over just because of the reputation of licensed titles, but I would say give this game a try. For me, it's probably the best video game Arnold's ever been in, and I'm including T2, the arcade game. So if you get a chance, check out True Lies. Originally an arcade game and released on Super Nintendo in 1994, Capcom's Knights of the Round puts players in the role of King Arthur, Lancelot, and Percival to battle through 7 different stages. A few things that make Knights of the Round stand out for me from other beat-em-ups. One is the leveling up system. As players defeat enemies, they drop money that can be picked up, which are basically experience points. Once you gather a certain amount of money, your player levels up, which is represented visually on screen by changes in armor and weapon size, as well as your speed, defense, and power stats increasing too. The second is the blocking mechanics. where if timed correctly, your player receives a few seconds of invincibility. However, time it incorrectly or no one attacks you during this period and your player becomes vulnerable for a few seconds. Just something small that does make the action more engaging. One thing I absolutely love about this game is the ability to ride a horse. How cool is that? The horse riding action is so fun. You're taking out enemies left and right while being poached atop your equine friend. Super, super exciting. This game is available on the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle that's on modern consoles, so it's easily accessible today. Lastly, I would say that the mechanics, the production, and the presentation of the game feels pretty similar to Sega's Golden Axe series. So if you're a fan of that series and looking for something similar on the Super Nintendo, check out Knights of the Round. Last, and certainly least, I debated putting this game on the list, but I thought it was a fun look back at early 3D games and to see how far they've come since then. Dirt Tracks FX was released in 1995, and let's get this out of the way from the start. The game looks and sounds terrible by today's standards. But for the time, it harnessed the power of the Super FX chip that was popularized by Star Fox, and it brought us truly 3D games on a 16-bit system, which was quite impressive. So back to that sound and music. I don't know about you, but a lot of times back in the day, I would just turn the volume down and listen to my own music. By this time, we were well into the 90s alternative rock explosion, and with this game, I specifically remember listening to Collective Soul's second album, which I think was self-titled. I played it on repeat over and over and over through my single-disc Sony boombox, or it might have been the 5-disc Iowa player at that point that almost everyone had a version of. So I'm not sure. The gameplay itself is decent enough. I did play this for about an hour when capturing the game footage. It was smooth playing, the frame rate wasn't terrible, and by using the shoulder buttons to make tight turns, it was pretty easy to control. There's 8 different characters to choose from and 22 tracks to race on. It does have standard dirt bike mechanics, meaning pressing up on the D-pad controls the front of the bike, while pressing down is going to control the back of the bike. Overall, I'm not really sure if you should play this and check it out, but I am interested to hear what other people think. But if you do want to see the power of the Super FX chip and see early polygonal games, take Dirt Tracks FX for a spin. So there you have it, 10 underrated games from the Super Nintendo. Let me know what you think, and let me know your recommendations. On the Sega Genesis video, I got so many great recommendations of games that I did not know about, and I'm definitely going to check those out. So I'd like to hear the same about Super Nintendo games. With that said, thank you again. I appreciate your time, and I will see you next time.